So, Stig, chapter 2. I wonder if he dreamt it all. Let's read and find out. Chapter 2 is called Digging with Stig. It was a fine autumn morning and the grass was very wet with dew outside. Barney managed to push his breakfast down as fast as he could manage. "What do you want to do today?" his grandmother asked as she drank her coffee. "I have to go to Sevenoaks this morning. Do you want to come?" Barney's heart sank. Going to Sevenoaks? Well, it was all right if you had nothing else to do, but he had to go and see Stig. "No, thank you, Granny," he said. "I don't think I want to go to Sevenoaks." "You'll be happy just messing about here?" asked his grandmother. "Yes, thank you. I just want to mess about with Stig." "Oh, I see," Granny smiled. "With your friend Stig? Well, Mrs. Pratt will be here all the morning, so if you like, you can stay with her. And with Stig, of course." Lou said she would like to go into the town, as she wasn't particularly interested in playing with Stig. Barney knew from the way that she said it that she still thought Stig was only a pretend friend. But that was all right. If she didn't want to meet Stig, she needn't. "Can I go out now?" he asked. "All right," said Granny. "Put your boots on," she called after him as he shot out through the door. Barney's feet made dark prints in the dew as he headed across the lawn towards the chalk pit. Then he stopped and stood still in the middle of the lawn. Suppose he didn't find Stig after all. The sun was bright. Yellow leaves fluttered down from the elm tree onto the grass. A robin puffed up its breast on a rose tree and squeaked at him. Barney suddenly wasn't sure that he believed in Stig himself. It wasn't a Stiggish day, like yesterday when he'd fallen down the pit. He had fallen, hadn't he? He felt the bump on the back of his head. Yes, that was real enough. He'd fallen and bumped his head. And then what? Funny things happened when you bumped your head. Perhaps you only saw Stigs when you fell and bumped your head. He didn't think he wanted to fall over the cliff again, on purpose, and bump his head again. Was Stig a person you could just go and play with, like the children at the end of the road at home? He had to find out, but he didn't want to go to the chalk pit and find nothing. He stood with his hands in his pockets in the middle of the lawn, his fingers playing with something hard in the left-hand pocket of his jeans. He remembered something and pulled out the thing he had in his hand. Of course, the flint. He looked at it glinting in the sunlight like a black diamond with its chipped pattern. He'd seen Stig make it. There was no mistake about that. Of course Stig was real. He set off again at a run, climbed the fence into the paddock and waded through the long wet grass on the other side. The copse round the edge of the chalk pit looked dark beyond the sunlit grass. In the middle of the paddock he found himself slowing down again and stopping. Something at the back of his mind was telling him that he'd seen pictures of chipped flints in books and real ones in museums, and that they were made thousands of years ago by rough people who weren't alive any longer. People found them and put them in cases with notices on them. Perhaps he'd just found this one and imagined everything else. And supposing he hadn't imagined Stig, was he the sort of person who liked people coming to play? Well, he told himself, all he really wanted to do was to look at the place where he had fallen over yesterday, have another look down the dump. There was that bicycle anyway. He walked to the edge of the paddock. A clump of brown grass jumped up from under his feet and bounced away towards a bramble patch, showing a white tail and 2 long ears. Barney's heart bumped, but it was only a rabbit. He ran after it, but it had disappeared into the thick of the undergrowth. Feeling bolder, he climbed over the fence and went carefully towards the edge of the pit, making sure that this time he kept near the big tree that seemed to be well anchored to the side, and peeped over. He could see a patch of raw earth and white chalk where the ground had given away under him, the dangling creepers lower down, and a scatter of broken chalk at the bottom. He craned over to see the hole he had made in the roof of the den. There was a pile of branches and rubbish against the foot of the cliff, but no gaping hole, not a sign of a hole, of a roof, of a den, of a Stig. He listened. A blackbird, turning over dry leaves in search of worms, was making a noise much too big for itself. But apart from that, the pit was silent and empty. Barney walked away from the edge of the pit and climbed over the fence into the sunshine of the paddock, thinking hard. He looked at the stone in his hand. He felt the bump on his head. He had seen the raw patch where the ground had given way. He remembered crashing through a sort of roof and leaving a big gaping hole, and yet there wasn't a hole, so he couldn't have made one. But he must have landed somewhere, and he had that clear picture in his head of looking up through a hole at the side of the cliff and the clouds passing over the sky. And suddenly, as he stood in the middle of the paddock, he gave a big jump as the answer came to him, like getting a sum right. If there wasn't a hole, it was because somebody had mended it. Stig wasn't the sort of person to leave a large hole in his roof for long, not his friend Stig. All at once, everything fitted together. Yesterday's adventure on that Stiggish sort of afternoon, the bump on his head, the flint, and this bright autumn morning when he was going to visit his friend Stig. And he was quite clear in his head now what he was going to do and how he was going to do it. And we'll find out that later. See you. Bye.